Hi, I'm Diane, your host of Epic Conversations. Thanks for joining us. And we are back again with my good friend, David McClure. David is a director at Andrew Womack Ministries, and he's got somewhere around 200 people that report to him. So David is a tremendous leader. And today we're going to talk about how leaders ask questions. And all right, I got to show you my notebook. This thing is like the old-fashioned notebook, I'm into the iPads, but for some reason, I just happened to grab this when I went to this conference, and David was there too, at Andrew Womack Ministries, Charis Bible College. They had a business summit. They call it Kingdom Business Summit when John Maxwell was there. So we had a great time.
We did.
So, David, we're going to talk about what we learned. We learned so much, so we're going to have to just start with one thing, and that's asking questions.
Yes.
And John Maxwell, it was one of his points, and he talked about asking questions that will help you know more. And he says the size of the leader is determined by the questions they ask. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to ask all 100 or whatever questions, but we'd like to ask questions. And one of them, he said, was, what's the greatest lesson you've ever learned in your life out of a failure? Or what did you learn the lesson out of a failure that came in your life? So let me start with that.
Okay.
And then tell us, David, what lesson did you learn out of a failure?
Well,
nobody likes to think about failures, right? But that's where you learn the most.
They don't. But for one, that's where the biggest laughs come from, is out of your failure.
After the...
Yes. And, the other thing is not everybody learns from their failure.
That's a good point.
Some people will say, well, yeah, that failed, but it wasn't my fault. It was her fault or his fault. They're the ones that caused it to fail. So they don't even learn anything from the failures, which means they're destined to repeat it. So I've got many, but I'm just going to share one. I'm not going to give a lot of the details behind it, but here's what I learned. Even though you're a leader, not all decisions are yours to make.
That's a good point.
So even if a question comes to you, your first question you should ask yourself, okay, is this a question I should even answer? Is this a decision I should even make? Or should I get my team around me so we can talk about it together? Or should I pass this question to another department, to another director, to another manager? Because I made a decision about 4 years ago that was a very sound decision. It had right written all over it. But the decision I made, even though it was very sound, and on one hand it was the right thing to do, if you want to go by the law, it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. But if I had passed the decision along to somebody else, a different decision, hindsight being 20/20, of course, probably would have been made. And one thing I've learned from working for Andrew Womack is Andrew Womack always errs on the side of the other person. Mm. He always, the Bible talks about, if they ask you to go 1 mile, go 2 instead. Mm-hmm. People will ask him something that really they shouldn't even be asking. And he'll just say, no, go ahead. In fact, give him this too. So he's a very unique individual in knowing who his source is, knowing who he's accountable to. Mm-hmm. Now, he could have made that decision, and he probably would have made the different one than I made at the time. But I learned right away that the decision was good, it just wasn't mine to make. And when the right person would have made the decision, they would have made a different decision, and the outcome would have been different. Now, a lot of good came out of it. There's a department that exists now because of my decision. So my point is this: until you make a decision that you create jobs for other people, is it really that bad of a decision?
That's good, David. That's really good. I know. It's just amazing how, as leaders, you know, we get asked questions, but at the same time, leaders do ask questions. Let me tell you an example that happened to me.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to write this one down.
When I graduated from college, or before I graduated from college, back in the 70s.
Now, wait a minute. You've got a lot of college degrees. Which college degree are we talking about?
My first one.
Okay, your first one.
Oh, my goodness. I know, not the sixth one, the first one. When I was making a decision, do I go into public accounting? I had taken accounting as a major, business administration, or do I go into, what did I say, public accounting or the private sector? And so what I did was I looked up various companies in the area. This is when I was living in Massachusetts, and it was in the 70s. So it was during the gas crisis in the 70s where you had to wait in line for gas for some reason. There was some shortage.
Now, did you have bell bottoms and big hair?
Yeah, I probably did. And I would contacted these. Some were public accounting and some were private. And I went in with a list of questions. And I obviously, I don't even think this was before email, but I might have sent them a letter, followed up with a phone call, and had my questions ready for them. I asked them all the same questions. And there probably was maybe 10 questions, 8 to 10 questions. And I write down the answers. And they're not used to people going in and asking them questions. They're used to interviewing people. Now, I wasn't interviewing for the job or any job. I wanted to know about the public sector and the private sector because I wasn't sure which path to take. Did I want to go and be a CPA, a certified public accountant, and work in the public accounting arena, or do I want to work for a private company? So after this thing, I'm trying to remember how many there was at the time, and maybe 8 to 10 companies I met with. And believe me, we had to wait in line for the gas. I remember sitting there for 30 minutes. And there was lines all backed up. So there was a crisis going on. It didn't bother me. And I chose the private sector, not the public CPA. This is at that time. I mean, it was interesting because when John Maxwell was talking about asking questions, I thought to myself, I was doing that all along in my 20s before I even knew that was a good thing to do. So I thought that was, I was like, do I get a point for that? I get a point. And so, I mean, what was the greatest lessons you've ever learned in your life? I mean,
out of a failure.
Out of a failure. And I want to say one other thing. And then I'll turn it back over to you. And then I'm like, I always thought it was wrong to have a failure. And what I've been learning mainly from listening to John Maxwell and then experiences in life, that all leaders fail.
Oh, yes.
All successful people fail. And so I was like, does that mean I must be a tremendous success if I've had a lot of tremendous failures? But I mean, seriously, it's out of a failure. And he made failure become this powerful thing. Like, all successful people have failed. I mean, Babe Ruth, he probably struck out more times than he hit home runs, but he's more noted for his home runs.
All failed people have failed. Everybody has failed.
Right. And we talked in the previous episode, remember, David, about that success cycle.
Right.
And that is, just so we make sure we get it right, we get tested, and then we fail. I mean, nobody wants to fail. Then you learn, and then you improve, and you re-enter. But you said some people don't learn from their failures, and that is a key point, because John Maxwell mentioned the same thing. You hit a lid. You if you're not learning, you're going to keep making the same mistake. So what the advice was to stay down until you learn.
Right.
And would you say that's a good thing?
I would. And since we were really talking about, successes and failures and all successful people have failed, I would say we should look for people not who have failed the most or failed the least, but who have learned the most from the failures.
Excellent.
When I interview people, I try not to ask them that particular question because, for one, they may be lying to me. They may have read it on Google, which didn't exist back in the 70s, but they may have read, great failures and answers for, director positions. But I try to ask people questions that where they're telling a story, just like you asked me. So what's a big lesson you learned from a failure? Well, I tell you a story, and as you're telling it, the person's telling it, they kind of get this grin, and it's like, yeah, I remember that one. And so when I ask questions of people, I'm trying to ask questions that will make them go back to a situation and relive it. For one, it's hard for them to lie, but they become very passionate about what they learned. I still tell people that situation, I learned that it wasn't my decision to make. And I use that a lot, not always. Sometimes I'll run ahead, but something comes up, and if it's big enough or it impacts others outside of my area, I'm like, should I run this by somebody else? So that's what I look for.
That is excellent, David. Thank you. That is a good lesson to learn. Just because you're asked a question as a leader doesn't mean you're the one who's supposed to answer it.
Right. And the other thing I do a lot of times with my staff is I will speak last. I'll say, well, what do you all think? Even though I may have my own idea, I may be convinced my idea is right and nobody could possibly come up with a better idea, but I will ask all of them because as a leader, as soon as you speak, somebody else won't speak.
Yeah.
The weakest link a lot of times won't speak. Well, David thinks this, so I'm not going to share my idea. So that's another thing I learned through failure.
That's good.
Speak last.
Speak last, right. And now the people aren't afraid to speak.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, subscribe to the channel and share it with a friend and have an epic day in the Lord. Hi, I'm Diane Grubus, and I've started a ministry, and I want to bless you. I'm so excited about it. DianeGrubus.com. Go to the website and check out all the wonderful things that we have in store for you. We have some great epic conversations with some powerful guests and some teachings, free downloads. And we would love to have you join us, love to have you partner with us. We appreciate you and we want to hear from you. So check out the website and thank you.